Whitney.
Hi.
And so we're excited to hear what you have found. If you guys have not registered with TechSAV on the Slack channel, if you just want to chat and leave your email address, we can get you added so you can get updates there as well and join our tech community. But just thank you everyone for joining us virtually today. And we are looking forward to seeing you all in person next time, maybe in the new offices with Creative Coast. But until then, I'm going to let you take over, Gwen, and thank you everyone for being here.
All right, so I'm going to ask the standard question. Can everybody see my screen? My beautiful Posture 101 screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. All right, so to get started, you know, as we've all been working from home, we're all sitting a lot more, I think. And we've also heard, I think over the past, you know, as we've gone through this transition to knowledge work, that sitting is really the most detrimental thing that we can do for our health. And my position is that it really does not have to be. I think sitting is quite simply just a different way of holding your body. And it does not have to be and shouldn't be painful or detrimental to your health or the end of knowledge workers in general. And it doesn't have to kill us. So I really think there's a way to do it safely and comfortably. So over the past maybe 5 years, I've been studying posture and implementing it on myself, and from the approaches of various different methods, from traditional physical therapy, something called neurokinetic therapy, which I'll talk about later. It analyzes compensation patterns that you'll come up with in your body to overcome dysfunctional habitualized patterns. The GoCal method, Esther GoCal is based in Silicon Valley. She's been a posture expert there for like the past 10 years. Alexander technique is kind of an ancient approach to posture, originally developed by an actor in the late 1800s, actually. And then I've been dancing for a while. I started off dancing ballet and tap at a young age, and in the past couple of years, I've taken up ballroom dancing. So that's taught me a lot about posture from the perspective of movement and not just sitting. So to start off, I think like everyone else, what brought me to posture and studying posture is that I was in pain. Typical crouching position right there. I'm working at my dining room table. I try not to do it that often. But I started suffering from, you know, lower back pain and even some migraines. And then in an attempt to counteract all the sedentary work, I was like, oh, okay, I'm just going to start exercising and running. And my body wasn't really prepared to do that. So I started experiencing all kinds of running and exercise injuries. In particular, what I struggled with is, and I pointed out on the anatomy model, there are the peroneal muscles on the side calves. They were overcompensating for some stability that I was lacking. So they were trying to stabilize my entire leg. They were overworking. So yeah, so I think a lot of us jump into exercise without really, you know, with all good intent, but maybe not from the best foundation that we can. And then of course, I approached fixing it from everything conventional that you've heard on the web, from pop culture, from morning news. For migraines, I adjusted my diet, tried physical therapy, traditional massage. For the exercise injuries, RICE, which is rest, ice, compression, and elevation, that did provide temporary symptomatic relief, but not long lasting. I tried alternate forms of exercise that also did provide some relief, but not the kind of health benefits I was looking for. And then for sedentary pain, kind of following everything that you've heard by products that have been peddled to you or people that you've heard in elementary school telling you to sit up straight, make sure you have lumbar support and keep your core tight, all of which are, you know, have good intentions, but kind of don't make sense and won't help you really. And I'll explain why in the coming slides. So about 4 years ago, I went to go see a sort of a body mechanics coach, initially with the intent of assisting with my running. He had been an Olympic level coach, and his approach was NKT, which is identifying root causes of dysfunction. So even after our first session and testing all my muscles, we identified my butt muscles weren't working. Not that I didn't have any, they just weren't working. My hip flexors were really tight. That can happen when you're sitting a lot too. And then an inactive core. Again, it's not that I didn't have one, it just wasn't working when I needed it to. So from there on out, he worked with me on targeted massage, targeted strengthening exercises. And I'll get into those later as well. But I also started exploring the other approaches to posture that can be taken. And this is when I came across the Go Count method. And her approach is really interesting. She looks at basically societies and people, how they stand and how they move before knowledge work or sitting screws them up forever. So she focuses on the pelvic position. Ideally, there's slightly anteverted pelvis, elongating your spine to lessen your lower back burden, and then basically minimizing the compression in your vertebrae, trying to actually use a particular cushion that she's developed to help you kind of stretch sit. And in order to understand all of that, I think in a more comprehensive way, I really would recommend her TEDx talk in Stanford. She goes into this in a lot more detail. And then from the Alexander technique perspective, it's really more of a focus on more non-doing and what you can do to properly align your bones. What kind of dysfunction can you remove? Where is your center of gravity? How can you stack properly? And then there's also a much more mental component to this. You're focusing on orders that you give to yourself, directions of movement, even when you're sitting. What sort of direction should you be picturing yourself in relationship to gravity, and how can you stay aware of where you are? And then the typical advice you'll hear from an Alexander technique teacher is allowing your neck to be free, which means not a tense neck. Kind of your head is balanced on top of your spine so that your neck can be relaxed. Your head to go forward, which really is, and you can see in the skeleton here, the occipital joint, which is right between the ears, is lining up with your center of gravity. And thinking up, always thinking up in opposition to gravity. Essentially, that's how we were built. We were built to, and this is the Alexander technique position, is we were built really to hold up our heads and hold up our heads and then move to get food and survive and all those things. So that's how our bones are constructed, and we should really honor that. So I took one-on-one Alexander technique lessons for a while. And then I started taking dance and learned a lot of postural methods through there too. And through there, there's a lot of focus on the foot and using in particular all of your foot to transfer weight, pushing down on the floor more than across it, still also thinking up, and also using gravity, not thinking of it as a detriment, but really, dance is kind of the relationship between your body and gravity, and then artistic expression and music. So I put move your spine across the floor because that's what my dance teacher always says when I'm not really providing enough momentum with all of basically my weight that I can. I'm not providing enough power through my feet. So that was a quick summary of all of the things, that sort of different approaches that I've learned about. There are a bunch more, but that's the particular path I had taken. Oh, okay. So to get into, I think what's going to be most relevant for this audience is the typical hunchback posture, where you're going to see your rounded shoulders, a forward tilted pelvic position, or the posterior pelvic tilt, and then a forward head position, which creates strain on the back of the neck And then you see the rounded lower spine, and then the shoulders coming forward. And I think a lot of the causes of this kind of dysfunction are really just habits, how you set up your home office. And one of my favorite things about having learned about posture is its relationship with confidence. So it can be an act of confidence to really hold yourself up properly. And it can be a struggle. So if you're lacking confidence or feeling insecure, you tend to close in on yourself. So that can be one of the causes of that. Excessive abdominal crunching. So as you can see there, maybe I've done, or anyone has done too many crunches in their life, or they're particularly tense there. So they'll be naturally constricted. And then even stomach inflammation can have an effect. Your muscles are going to be less likely to work if is some kind of interference happening there. And really, I'm going to get into a little bit of anatomy here and not try to bore you completely. The detriment that it has on your muscles with habitual misuse is pretty big. And I'll point these out in a minute. So you're crunching your pecs, which is like right across your chest, your upper abdominals, your lats, which are on the sides of your body, your upper trapezius, which is kind of the closer to your neck muscles. Scalenes and sternocleidomastoids are also your neck muscles. And then what becomes weak or inhibited is your thoracic spine, your mid and lower trapezius are failing to activate, and your rhomboids, and some deeper neck flexors to hold your head up. So to go through these so you know where they are and can locate them, your pec major and your pec minor, both of them are just as important. It can be a little harder to massage your pec minor since it's underneath. The subclavius, which is a ligament right underneath that collarbone, serratus anterior, your upper, mid, and lower traps, and then your lats. And then with a particular neck focus, which was my struggle, was the scalene muscles, which are really what you're straining the most with a forward head posture. The sternocleidomastoid, which is that you can pinch it. It starts kind of like right behind your ear, and it's a gigantic muscle. It gets really tense, and you're overextending it usually. And then you've got your suboccipital muscles, which are behind at the lower part of your head, which also get constricted. So now that you've learned all of this and all of your sources of pain and what is going wrong, what can you actually do? And the first part is really putting in the work, 3 to 4 times a week, daily if you can, of targeted massage, stretching those muscles, and then strengthening the muscles that have become weak or inhibited. And then alternatively, and just as hard, is actually putting that into practice with awareness, incorporating feedback. And when I say feedback, I mean not just how you look. That is one source of feedback you can use, shouldn't be the only one. Should be primarily how you feel, how you're stacking, where your center of gravity is, how you're balanced. Experimentation, gonna have to spend some time experimenting with your setup to figure out what works for you, and then also visualizations. And I'll go into those a little bit more. Sort of thinking up is a type of visualization that you can use. It's harder to, it can be difficult to describe a lot of these very physical things and changes that you need to make, but visualizations and even metaphors can help as well. So really the best way is to rebuild from the bottom up, both literally and figuratively, from gravity up. And then sort of finding how your body has created these patterns to hold yourself in opposition to gravity, what you can do to fix those. So bringing all of these together, what I took away from all of these methods, from the GoCal method in particular, making sure you have a slight anterior pelvic tilt when you're sitting, really want to focus on extending the vertebrae and stretch sitting. And I can show you the pillow for that in a minute. Alexander technique, my main takeaway from there is that your spine is a lot longer than you think it is. When you start to think of your spine from really the center of your ears down to where your tailbone is, that's really where your spine starts and ends. It's a lot longer than just like the base of your neck down to your lower back. And then from dance, thinking about how you're never really entirely still. Everything that you're doing and every position that you're holding involves some kind of movement, some kind of activity or engagement. So the tools that I use to release a lot of these tight muscles, I use a foam roller that's in the center there. And I can demonstrate once I show my video how you can actually use all of these. Lacrosse or massage balls. A muscle hook, which is one of my favorite things. It's a way to target the back without contorting in any kind of weird position. A yoga wheel, another way to stretch your back. A massage star, I use that to massage my neck muscles, and stretch bands for providing opposition. So this is a picture of me with better posture on the right. It's still not perfect. You can see I still have a bit of a forward head posture, but my pelvis is rotated slightly. The center of my ears is really closer to being above my center of gravity and right where my sit bones are. My computer is a lot higher up, so it's easier for my head to stay balanced on top of my spine. And then you can see my shoulders are relaxed because I'm sitting higher so that my keyboard sits lower. And there's no need for me to hunch at all or bend over. So resources and references, and I can provide these after. The GoCal method, these are all really online. And then people I work with locally at the Holistic Health Center, Krista Rosenkrantz and Dr. Hargrove. It's a chiropractor, and then of course Savannah Ballroom Dance, super fun place. Love taking ballroom dance lessons there. So that is the end of my presentation, at least the PowerPoint version of it. And let me share, well, let me pause. That was a lot of content, a lot of information. What questions can I answer before I go into any kind of demonstration of all the tools I use?
Hey, it's Jen.
Hey.
So I've read online a little bit about they have some new kind of devices, IoT-like devices like Upright and some things like that actually are supposed to help measure or alert you. Have you tried any of those?
I have not. I think I've used alternate forms of feedback. So what I've done previously is put like a ball at the center of my back when I'm sitting to make sure I stay upright and the ball doesn't fall. Okay. So it's just kind of my own hacked version way of doing it. I don't see any reason. I've noticed those. My dance teacher uses them too. As long as you're not introducing any additional tension, I'd say go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've definitely noticed my posture is worse now than it was in the office.
Yeah. And that's like the setup really too. Just as important is, and really what's going to set you up well is making sure your eyes stay level. So making sure your computer's elevated, ideally just your monitor, and then your keyboard is lower so you can keep your shoulders relaxed. And that's going to help you from like creating the shoulder tension and leaning over.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions? We are recording this. Henrik asked that. Any other questions?
Gwen.
Yes.
Thanks for the presentation. That was great.
Mm-hmm.
I have a crap desk. Should I get a better desk? And should I ask my boss to buy it for me?
So, funny story. When I first started working and really learning about posture, to elevate my laptop, I started using cardboard boxes that I found around the office, and they were really unsightly. And we would host clients in the office. So my argument, I went to my employer and was like, listen, this is better for my health and long-term productivity, but it also looks bad to clients. Can you help me by getting me or assisting me with some sort of elevation? So they bought me, and actually a bunch of other coworkers, laptop stands. In terms of your chair, I really think that you should be able to sit comfortably on a bench or really any other device. I don't think fancy chairs are quite all that necessary. You shouldn't be leaning back anyway. You should be able to hold yourself up with just stacking your spine and the support from your muscles. But if you can get your employer to pay for stuff that helps you and it feels good, I'd do it.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
I do have a fancy chair, but it's my cat's most of the time, so that's good to hear.
I have a fancy chair question.
Yeah.
Have you tried those rocker stools? They're like you balance on. They have I can't really, it's hard to explain, but they have kind of they're supposed to help you build your core while you're sitting.
Yeah.
Have you-
I've seen people sitting on all those things with bad posture.